Wasn't as loud as the ovation that Jesse got, but never mind. Well, first of all, thank you, Jesse, for making this conference happen. It's been a wonderful experience, and thank you very much as well for inviting me to give this shot at a new genre, the closing plenary talk at the conference. It's actually my second trip to Elon. About 10, 11 years ago. I came here with a colleague from Montreal, from McGill, named Anthony Perret. We had been invited by Tim Peoples. When I was teaching at Purdue, Tim was finishing his PhD, and then he came to Elon, and he invited Anthony and I to come down to Elon and kind of just hang out for a few days with the writing people here. So that's what we did. I gave a couple of talks and just sat and talked and drank some beer with the writing folks. And so my memory of Elon has, I think it's bigger than I remember it being then, but the same architecture, the same beautiful landscape, just a wonderful, wonderful environment that you have here. Well, okay. I have a mic on here. I don't know if is that good? Okay. I want to give you the order of affairs here. I want to start off with an excerpt from Jessie Moore's paper, or one of the papers she has in the showcase. I've always been really fond of maps. When I got an atlas when I was 12, I was just thrilled. And so canoe mapping, I do a lot of canoeing, love those kinds of maps, just getting around the continent maps. So when I saw Jessie's cartography metaphor in her paper, I was really taken with it. And that's why I'm going to show it to you, because I just think it's such a wonderful metaphor for what you've been doing here for the last 2 years and what everybody's been doing for the last couple of days. Then I want to use my situation, my experience here as someone attempting a new genre, having given a closing plenary talk before, so I thought there might be something we could look at in that and reflect on in terms of attempting to learn a new genre. What I thought I'd do, after hearing last night at dinner, Jessie introduced the statement that the group here, the research group has produced as a result of their collaboration over the last couple of years. And she started off with some slides, if you remember the green light, yellow light. So when I got home, I thought, well, what different perspective can I bring to bear? There's so much that I might have talked about from reading the literature that was generated over the last couple of years, and also just hanging out at the conference for the last couple of days, that it was actually summed up in that statement. So I thought, oh, okay, what do I have to offer here? And then I thought, well, okay, what if we kind of look at this statement, the green light statements, the amber light statements, from the perspective of somebody who's done a lot of training, coaching writers in the workplace. Just kind of looking at it point by point and seeing as kind of as a heuristic to see, well, first of all, just how well it might hold in the workplace, but also there may be things that reflect back on the school situation, the classroom. Yeah, and then I want to talk a bit about the theories, methods that seem to be in play here at the conference over the last couple of days, and some thoughts for where we might go from here. I don't know how tired you are, but I'm going to try and make this a bit interactive. We'll see. We'll see how tired you are or how good I am at getting you involved. So just forewarning. Okay. This is 2 slides with a chunk, a little bit left out in the middle from Jessie's paper, Mapping the Questions, the State of Writing-Related Transfer Research. So, and remember, this is a map lover who's showing you this. Early maps of the American West were notoriously incomplete. While charting the rivers and pathways that have been explored, cartographers could only make often incorrect inferences about the often vast spaces in between. As more people explored and claimed new uses for the land, maps gained more detail, territorial boundaries, tributaries to previously mapped rivers, viable routes through mountain ranges, section boundaries, railroad lines, and other markers of the three-dimensional details of maps attempted to represent. With new land survey methods, these maps became more comprehensive and better predictors of what subsequent explorers would find. Like early maps of the American West, mapping the research on writing transfer reveals both pockets of detail and gaps in disciplinary knowledge. Even the pockets of detail often come with the limitations inherent in mapping. They typically reveal one moment in one season of a writing program, or the path of only a few students in their writing lives, or an assessment of a unique situation that may not be replicable at other institutions. Yet the growing amount of research exploring writing-related transfer does begin to offer a lay of the land to understand where the discipline's understanding of transfer is and where it might go. I think you probably agree that's a pretty good metaphor for what the group has been doing here over the last couple of years and what everybody here has tried to contribute over the last couple of days. There's mapping happening, and some parts of the map are filled out with more confidence than other parts, and perhaps there are even a few inaccuracies on the map if we think of writing transfer theory and research. I think it's a good analogy. And mostly, I just really liked it, so I really enjoy reading this out, so I did. So a closing plenary talk is a heuristic for thinking about writing transfer. Closing plenary talk it's a new genre for me, and the yikes is, yikes, when I got the invitation from Jesse. It was, oh, well, that sounds like a challenge. I haven't done that before. I wonder how that'll go. I thought that I would talk about some sources that I was able to draw on and some differences and similarities in those previous experiences, just to see if we can cast a little bit of light on the experience of one person attempting a new genre. I have Jesse's email actually was very, very helpful in terms of what kind of animal is a closing plenary talk anyway. The part in italics had some really good cues. Reflect on what they've heard or you've heard during the conference and read in a collection of working papers we'll be publishing on the seminar website prior to the conference. Perhaps provide some research methods, insights for conference attendees continuing this work, and offer some ideas for next steps. So that helped a lot. It alerted me to the fact that there, in fact, had been a body of papers generated through the 2-year seminar that I needed to read, which I did, or at least all I could get from the showcase, all that I could download from the showcase. I read those. And also to look at what's been happening over the last couple of days, kind of slipping in and slipping out of sessions. What kinds of questions have been asked and what kinds of methods have been used to address those questions? What kind of theoretical frameworks are people using? What are some of the things that people have started to find out and are pointing towards for future research? So this was very helpful, very succinct, and helped me a lot. Okay, back here. I had heard, I think I've only heard one closing plenary talk in my whole life, I think, and it was David Russell's talk at the end of the RAB2, the Writing Research Across Borders conference at George Mason a year or two ago. And what he did was kind of this overview of what had been going on. It was a longer conference, it was 3-4 days. Basic themes, ideas, emerging ideas. But I knew that this was going to be a bit different because there was a body of literature, there are papers that have been produced over the last couple of years by the research group here. So I thought, well, David didn't do that. So I guess what I need to do is a variation on what David did. I mean, if I could do the part that he did nearly as well as him, I'd be very pleased. and then also kind of folding in the papers that I've read from the research group. I had given one keynote talk at a conference up in Canada a couple of years ago, the Canadian Association for the Study of Discourse and Writing. But obviously, a keynote is different because you come with it prepared, whereas a closing plenary, you can't prepare it before. Well, I'd read the papers, at least I had that advantage. I could read the papers, but you kind of have to compose it on the fly as you're taking notes, thinking about the sessions that you see. Very different experience from that keynote that I wrote and presented to open a conference that I came to the conference with. So yeah, there's some similarities. I don't know if they're different genres or variations on the same genre, but definitely there were different similarities but differences there. Conference papers, well, like everybody here, I've given a fair number of conference papers. And there's some parallels there. You stand in front of a group of people and you talk about a topic of interest to the field, but at the same time, you're not presenting your own research. You're presenting or thinking about, commenting on other people's research. So it's a different kind of thing. Here, my job is to kind of map out, following in Jesse's footsteps, what people have been up to the last couple of years and over the last couple of days. Quite different from a stand-up conference paper that you might give to 20 people in a classroom. My classroom experiences have helped. I've lots of experience standing in front of people and talking, which maybe that's a stretch. But if I had never done that, this would have been a whole lot scarier, I think. I mean, it's scary enough, but it would have been a lot scarier. So, but I think that, I have taught in amphitheaters and to students and smaller groups. So I think just that public speaking aspect, I think, has helped. But obviously very different. A couple of useful concepts, I think, to bring to bear as kind of a lens for thinking about this experience that we are having as I deliver this closing plenary talk. Near transfer versus far transfer. Here's where it gets interactive. Can I ask somebody for a good definition of near transfer? As I always tell my students, you'll crack before I will. Oh, great. Oh, good. Thank you.
So when knowledge from a learning context is similar enough to map over to a target context, you have an example of near transfer.
So it's not an abrupt shift. It's not exactly continuity, but not a major.
The similarities are familiar enough that it can cue the prior knowledge almost unconscious.
Yeah. Well, if I had to choose and say this is a near transfer experience or a far transfer experience, I think I'd say it's more near than far, but it's definitely not near. There was enough of a difference to at least keep me, a bit nervous over the last couple of days and now. What about high road transfer versus low road transfer? Can we have a definition of that from somebody, please? Remember what I tell my students. Well, I'll put the pressure on the people who've been here for 2 years in a writing seminar trying to figure this stuff out. Probably, and the author or the person who wrote the paper. Yeah, please.
Sure. So I think of low road transfer as, I think of the metaphors that Perkins and Solomon use. Low road transfer is like you learn to drive a car and then you get behind the wheel of a truck and the window begs one to look through it, the steering wheel begs one to steer it, versus high road transfer where there's more deliberate mindful abstraction.
I would like to think this is a case of high road transfer, in that I thought about it a fair amount. So I think I would say it's not near transfer, but it's kind of near transfer, and it's high road in that I thought about it a lot, and this situation is different enough that I did have to think about it a fair amount. Consequential transfer, can somebody give us a definition for that? I won't ask you, Steve.
Good. I'm a scientist.
Anybody? You're allowed to look at your notes. Well, I know in the end I can always ask Jesse, but and I will. I have to. Anybody? Jesse, save us.
Are you referring to consequential transitions? So generalizing, being able to more substantially change how we think about things and change individual and
Okay.
what we're learning when that's very wrong.
So if I understand it, it's sort of something that's it's not an easy transfer, and the stakes are kind of high. The new situation is significantly different, and there's enough at stake, and the kind of transfer experience that might leave its mark on somebody. So yeah, I would say this is consequential. Yeah, when I'm sort of in my room tonight, back in the, I'll be thinking about this. So it'll definitely have left its mark one way or another. And if it turns out okay, then I can, the next time I can think, hey, I got through that one. That worked okay. So not a shift of identity, but maybe a shift in terms of my competence, what I can take on and do. Are there any other of those key concepts in the statement that you think we could throw onto at least figuratively, onto the screen here, and see if we can use as a probe for this I was about to say near-death experience. this new genre experience that I'm having. Any thoughts? Yeah, yes.
From the statement or just from what I witnessed?
Wherever.
Witnessed?
Yeah.
Well, there seems to be a kind of a direction where identity seems to be a component in this, our new redefinition or reworking of transfer seems to be a component. I saw a lot that recur in more than one conference. So that seems to be something that seems people are thinking about now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess along with that goes the method of trying to get at those inner experiences and feelings, the affect that people are having. Yeah, and I've described a little bit about my interior state the last day or two, and it's a bit of anxiety, and gee, I think I can do this, but well, so my disposition, I guess the sum of my dispositions, it's okay. But certainly the experience, I haven't been researching it, or taking notes on my internal experience, but I think it's part of the picture, for sure, with our students. The kinds of things that they experience when they're stretching beyond what they've done before. So yeah, and that was a theme that came up quite frequently in the sessions that I've sat in on over the last couple of days, was that concern for identity. The writer, the focus on the writer and what the writer's experiencing and what the writer's sense of self is as a writer. A very, I think, an emerging theme for sure. Any other? Yes?
I'm just wondering, could you reflect on that concept of identity in relationship to your experience of coming up to the podium and having to talk about what happens to your sense of your identity? Because
Sure. Sure. I mean, yesterday I was thinking, what the hell am I going to do? I mean, I just got this statement from Jesse. This is sort of the cream of the ideas that have come out of the 2-year. So I can't talk a whole lot about that. And I guess it was also thinking, kind of stepping back into my identity as a workplace coach. I'll say a little bit more about my background when I talk about the bringing that workplace experience to bear on some of the key statements that principles that Jesse mentioned yesterday. But so there was kind of that shift back into, oh yeah, right, I did used to work in a central bank. I remember that and what it felt like, and how I felt. I got the job. I got a job at the Bank of Canada as an ESL teacher after doing an MA in language and literature, and then it was that was sort of in the period when you didn't need any other kind of credential, and that changed pretty quickly. But so I worked for 3 years as an ESL teacher in this corporate environment, and that was kind of a shift. I'd never done that or thought of myself as somebody who would have a career in a corporation. And then I had a chance to develop a writing program. So yeah, I've been kind of revisiting that, thinking how do these principles not stand up, but can I bring some light to bear on them through that experience that I had? And I left the Bank of Canada in 1996, so it was years ago. And what else? Well, I was really tired yesterday. From working, where's Jan? Working with getting our paper together that we gave yesterday. I didn't really get any sleep, and so there were moments of terror yesterday, and I think it was just I was so tired. I thought, oh my God, why did I ever say yes? That I would, what was I thinking? So I guess that's what I would say. And I mean, if I get out of it alive, I mean, it'll be a good thing for my identity. I'll think, oh yeah, hey, I can. That's one more genre I think I can at least take a stab at. So that's kind of what I've been experiencing. Sort of stepping back. I mean, I really think of myself as a university teacher now and researcher, but stepping back into those years. And I was at the bank. Well, I worked there as a writing consultant and trainer for 15 years. So stepping back into that, and then being pulled back into the present and those moments of fear yesterday, thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do here? And then I feel okay now, just to share that with you. But does that kind of address what you were? Yeah, thanks. Any other thoughts about yeah, Jen?
Well, it seems like there's a lot of reflection going on. So.
Yeah. If you call being scared reflection. Well, reflection too.
Possibly also metacognition, because reflection and metacognition are two concepts that have been very important.
Well, I certainly did. Like going back to Jesse's invitation, I read that a couple of times again and thought about David Russell's presentation and what was similar in the context and the rhetorical situation from now, what I'm doing now. So yeah, I kind of made a mental list and sort of thought about those things thinking about the thinking that I was, going to have to do tomorrow kind of thing, and the kinds of thinking I'd done in the past. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Jesse.
One more. It sounds like you are employing several strategies that I might call boundary tools that you're using to help take your prior experiences and transition into this new position.
Well, certainly looking at the key statements, the slides that you showed us last night, and trying to think, well, if I look through this through the sort of deterministic screen of a workplace writing coach, what do I see? In terms of how does it accord, or are there other things that come to mind? So yeah, very much so, for sure. That really crossing that boundary of memory kind of back into my earlier experiences and trying to think about that. Yes?
As someone who's worked in the workforce, a lot of your research has taken place. I'm curious as to whether any of the discussions we're having, the orientation we're having towards transfer, whether there's been moments where you've been silent out of politeness, but maybe there's moments where you're saying, I don't have problems either methodologically or the way aspects of this discussion is heading?
No. I mean, to be honest, I put my paddle in the water in the early 2000s looking at writing transfer, but then haven't with a paper I wrote with Nicole Brown from Western Washington. But we kind of put that aside, and Nicole went her way, and we met at Purdue. I was teaching there. She was my research assistant. But haven't really done much or anything on the transfer front, except some work that Jen Gilbert and I have been doing, thinking about genre knowledge and what the heck these young or these junior economists at the Bank of Canada are having trouble producing the kind of discourse that's expected. What's what's going on there. Yeah, so I feel like not a stranger in a strange land, but I certainly don't feel that I know anything near as much as the people who've been here for a couple of years with their projects and their publications. So no, there haven't really been moments when I thought, I guess you mean from my kind of workplace perspective. No, there haven't. That didn't really begin until I thought, well, maybe that would be something I could do during my, the talk today. Yes.
I think a term that's been floating around, and I'm not just saying this as a part of my panel.
Of course not.
we don't self-promote in this field at all. I think prior knowledge is something that you're kind of getting at, though, with what you're talking about. So I think it'd be interesting if you could maybe, do you think what you're doing now in responding to this new genre is something of an assemblage or a remix, or what would you think?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a remix of kind of different strands of experience that I've had and trying to kind of pull them together. So yeah, I think it is a remix of a kind, because I quite conscious. I made a list at one point of similar experiences that I had or quasi-similar experiences, and thought about that. So yeah, I think absolutely yes, yeah. Okay, we'll maybe move along. We've looked at this. So a look at the Elon statement on writing transfer from the viewpoint of a workplace writing coach. You know this is really fresh because the statement was fresh last night. We just got it after dinner. So I've talked a bit about my background beginning as an ESL teacher at the central bank, and then developing a writing program to work individually with economists at first, and then other professionals with one-to-one on the actual documents that they had to produce in their job. And often documents intended for more senior audiences, because those tended, if a writer, junior economist was having trouble with those, that was a cause for concern from the supervisor on up. The program went really well. It started with one economist, just working with one economist on one paper, a guy named Mike, and that worked okay. And it kind of eventually started to flourish, and we were able to hire another person, a writing consultant like me. And then a few years went by, and we hired a third person to do what we were doing in French, because the institutions like the bank are bilingual. And this is all before I started my PhD. So I had a good 15 years of working with people. It was kind of like not a big laboratory, but it was a big research site, because I did keep a foot in academia, so that those research questions that people were asking about writing, I'm sort of aware of those. And it was just a wonderful place to do field research. And the bank was fine with that, because I always was able to use that in the one-to-one training or some of the workshops that I did. So for a long time, I didn't think of myself as an academic. Well, I guess obviously until I got to the other side of my dissertation and started to feel that way. So that's the kind of experience that I've been trying to conjure up and bring to bear on the statement that Jesse shared last night. So green light. If you remember the green light, these are concepts that the people who've been here for a couple of years in the seminar feel fairly confident about. Yeah, we would, hang our hat on that one. So, and you'll see what I've done. I've just kind of plugged in workplace writing here to see how does it resonate. So transfer can be taught by workplace writing coaches if it's taught explicitly, but we need to study how to do it well in different contexts. That is absolutely true. I know when I was going to be preparing to work with an economist, or perhaps giving a workshop with 3 or 4 economists, I did my homework. I would interview each of the writers. I'd interview the supervisors. I would interview the senior person who is going to be the audience for the particular document. And I would distill that, and I remember writing up notes and summarizing and preparing teaching materials, really, for these economists about the audiences they were writing for, and why the senior people needed research notes and analytic notes from them, what they did with them. What does this have to do with monetary policy decisions? So yeah, that was an approach I took. I would always get out there and kind of do some research, write it up, and get it into a form where I could share it with the writer, if it was an individual case or workshop group that I was working with. So yeah, and I think that made a difference. I like to think it did. I think it did. So yeah, I think there are things that you can do in terms of explicit instruction in a workplace situation. Workplace writers facing a new and difficult rhetorical task draw on previous knowledge and strategies, and when they do that, they must transform or repurpose that previous knowledge. Jen Gilbert talked about a case of an economist that she had worked with. I guess what I forgot to say was I left the bank in '96, but then Jennifer and I, a couple of years ago, spent, I think, 2 years in the bank doing some consulting and researching. And one of the people that Jennifer worked with, a guy named Michael, let's say, he had a PhD, come out of his PhD studies, and the particular job he had required that he write short, say, 2-page analytic notes for the senior manager, for the governor, and his, what they call the governing council. But he didn't feel very comfortable writing two-page notes because he wanted to add the other 25 pages of evidence and support and math. And I mean, he felt really insecure sending up these two-page notes. But Jennifer and I were talking about that the other day, and I think what he didn't realize is that the senior management's view was, you're a professional economist. We trust you. That's why we hired you. And so there's a lot of trust. The senior people will take what they need from those 2 pages, and in certain they'll ask a lot of questions about certain things, but there are other areas that have to do with the analysis where, yeah, you're an economist, and a good one, and so we trust you. But it took a while before this economist was able to kind of let go of that and get comfortable just sending up these very short, what initially to him had seemed really flimsy documents. And so in that case, well, it does have a happy ending because he did learn to do it over, I think Jem worked with him for 3 months. And so, yeah, initially what he brought with him was getting in the way. Well, I shouldn't say that. Initially, I'm sure some things he learned to do during his PhD in economics did help him as a writer in the situation he was in at the bank. But there was also that other strand of experience and expectation and comfort or discomfort that didn't help him at all. His supervisor constantly was sending drafts back for revision. So in the workplace, yeah, I mean, absolutely. The writers do draw on previous experience and strategy. As I was saying, sometimes for better and the odd time for worse. And it's definitely a repurposing. I think that's a good way of putting it, transforming, repurposing that knowledge. So yeah, I think that one stacks up pretty well from a workplace writing coach's perspective. Reflective writing by workplace writers promotes preparation for transfer-focused thinking. Not so much. I wouldn't tell the economists they had to keep a personal journal about their writing. Some of them, though, I mean, I would say if you're feeling uneasy about what's happening here, do some free writing, which seemed kind of weird, for them at the beginning. But a couple of them got into free writing. But I'd say, really, I didn't have opportunities to ask people to be reflective through, let's say, for example, keeping a personal journal or even a work journal. So, not to say that this isn't a green light principle, but just to say it doesn't perhaps apply as much in a workplace setting. Coaching in the workplace that promotes transfer involves asking workplace writers to engage in metacognitive awareness, including asking good questions about writing situations and developing heuristics for analyzing unfamiliar writing situations. Definitely. When I worked with a writer, say an economist or a business analyst or a senior librarian, the deal was, I have to work with you from the beginning. I don't want to come in when you've already got a draft. It has to be a workplace document, and I have to work with you kind of continuously all the way through till you're finished. So I would give them handouts, kind of prompts to get them thinking about audience. Who's this for? And often they didn't know. It's like, well, why don't you find out, Ask your supervisor, handed this back to you 4 times. I mean, ask him or her, who the heck is this for? And why do they need it? What's their job? So as we go through some planning and then drafting, revising, more drafting, when the economist was happy with it, go off to his or her supervisor for review. Because at a place like the bank, a junior economist doesn't write something and send it to the governor. It goes through all these levels of review before it gets up there. So I did give them materials that I hope would prompt them to ask questions about audience. Who are you writing for? Think about their job and what they have to do, and how does this piece of information that you're producing for them, how does it fit in? Why do they need it? Why should they read it? They get hundreds of documents that go over their desks every day. So I think that was what I was trying to do. I wouldn't have called it then. I wouldn't have called it that then, because it wasn't really in my vocabulary. But a metacognitive awareness, hoping the next time, maybe they'd even hopefully drag these notes out, these prompts out, and just rethink them and use them again. I mean, whether they did or didn't, I had no control of that. But that was my assumption, that I could, by giving, as we went through the different stages of the writing process, I would give them handouts with questions and prompts that I wanted them to be thinking about. And it did appear to work. Now, I don't have a lot of evidence about what happened the next time, because I might not have been there the next time. Did that metacognitive awareness, did it come into play, with the next note they had to write, perhaps for a different audience? Yes?
I'm trying to learn the genre myself here, so can I ask a question at this point?
Sure.
I guess you had a question mark around the reflective writing, and from reading your work, it just seems that if I understand correctly, in distinguishing social motives in the workforce and in school, part of what was identified was that there's almost an epistemic and also an assessment component to writing, so that it's almost hyper-reflective in academia in a way that is very intermeshed within the workforce. And, I've inherited a pedagogy from Anis Bawarshi where we're very invested in sort of this metacognition and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think reading work that's situated in the workforce, I've always had a question mark around my own pedagogy. Right?
Yeah.
Does it work and whatnot? And so, in part, I think because that kind of enactment you're talking about, that writing is so intermixed in the action itself and what it does. And ultimately, it's assessed by whether it's successful simply from doing the activity.
Well, it kind of is. I mean, in a very, very, not odd way, but, as I was saying, a junior economist would never write something and send it off to the governor. It would get intercepted before it got 50 feet away. That economist always had to have his or her supervisor, who was a more experienced economist, review it. So that's the kind of assessment. In fact, what the experience that generated the opportunity to create this writing program at the bank was, I was in the language unit at the Bank of Canada teaching ESL, and the chief of the research department came up, because we were the language people, and he said, is there anybody up here that would be willing to work with Mike, was his name, and he said, and Chuck, the chief of the research department, said, I have to rewrite his stuff every single time that he's writing for senior management. He's great when he writes for his peers, those 30-page papers with mathematics, but these 2 pages, I just have to keep, and I can't do that anymore. Is there somebody here who'd take a shot? So those kinds of judgments in a session and assessments are happening all the time. If I were a junior economist and I'd kind of gotten some of this stuff and I wrote something and it went to the reviewer, my boss, who was the reviewer, and just it came back with a couple of maybe points, but basically was, yeah, this is pretty much ready to go. I mean, that's definitely a form of assessment, and it kind of goes on each and every time that somebody writes something in the bank, if they're destined for more senior audiences. Okay, cross-workplace collaboration could enrich the discussion on writing transfer and allows new perspectives to become visible. Again, this is nothing in my experience would question this. It's not as relevant, I guess. I never met, in all the years I worked at the bank, I didn't meet anybody else who had a similar job anywhere else. There were lots of editors, but there were I just didn't meet people. There may have been people who were doing that professionally, who would have a consulting office and kind of go in and work with people. But in terms of, I was a full-time permanent in-house employee, so I didn't have other people that I could hook up with and do collaborative research in other business sites. So, I mean, I think this obviously makes total sense. It just perhaps isn't as relevant for the situation in the workplace. Okay, we're on to amber, yellow light. So there's a certain amount of confidence, but not total confidence. Transfer in workplace writing involves specific kinds of knowledge, approaches, behaviors, and/or dispositions among discretely bounded domains. Yeah, I mean, from my experience working at the Bank of Canada and consulting with other organizations, that's absolutely true. If we think of that gentleman, Michael, that Jennifer was working with, who fresh out of his PhD in economics was having a bit of trouble getting oriented, yeah, I mean, there was a lot that he knew how to do in terms of mathematical modeling and the sorts of the repertoire of a professional economist that he would be able to bring in and apply in his work in the bank. So, and certain kinds of knowledge about macroeconomics and central banks and their job. Presumably he would know something about that as a PhD economist. Behaviors, sometimes people in the bank had to learn to behave a little differently than they did when they were doing their PhD in economics, simply because they had to bite the, well, I'm going to say maybe it is similar to the relationship with the supervisor, I don't know. I was going to say that the person in the workplace just has to bite the bullet. If the supervisor hands the paper back 4 times for 4 rewrites, you just have to kind of grin and bear it, I guess. If you don't, that wouldn't work very well. So yeah, I think there's a lot that professionals, people with graduate training in a profession, when they bring it into the workplace, there are certain things they do know how to do, but there's a heck of a lot that's site-specific as well. Without explicit rhetorical education, workplace writers are less likely to transform rhetorical awareness into performance. I would say in the workplace, that's probably very unlikely, because most people, most places, most times, when they go into a new organization, a new job, they figure it out themselves. There isn't, maybe they're getting feedback, cues from other people in the organization, but there's not a writing consultant or a writing trainer to help them. And countless people succeed in all professions. It might be uncomfortable, but they succeed ultimately without explicit instruction in rhetorical principles. So I would say just, yeah.
If you rephrase that to, with explicit rhetorical education, workplace writers are more likely to transform rhetorical awareness.
I'd say yes. Yeah. Well, again, I just anecdotally, from the experience of working with writers, that things did seem to improve. At least the news from the writer and the supervisor was, yeah, this seems to be working. So yeah, could you say that again, Stephanie?
With explicit rhetorical education, workplace writers are more likely.
I'd say yes, but then I'd also say it's probably like 1 out of 100,000 actually gets it. Is able to have it, Yeah, but I think it does make a difference if it's there. At least I hope it did, you know, in the experiences that I had. I guess I was doing this for 15 years. If it hadn't been working, they would have got rid of me. So I guess that's, you know, I guess it did. Oh, sorry, yeah.
So could you just go back to that
Sure.
other slide? So I really like the suggested change, it making it positive rather than negative.
Yeah.
That feels really good. But I wanted to think about that for just a second, because I think whether it's phrased positively or negatively, I wonder if the lack of training for, say, economists, and I've done similar work with environmental scientists in the Cal EPA,
Yeah.
going and doing writing training for them. But generally, workplaces don't turn to academia.
Right.
I wonder if the assumption is that the graduates, either PhDs or undergraduates, should already have had that training. That our job as writing teachers on the undergraduate level is to provide that rhetorical awareness, and people will just get it at work. And do you think that is that an assumption that employers are making?
I think some employers would, even the concept of rhetorical awareness, you know, some people in the workplace would have that.
They would call it writing skills, and not
Writing skills, yeah. But even the concept, some people would get that, and other people, it wouldn't have ever kind of occurred to them. Sort of writing's writing. You know, what do you mean, you know, rhetorical awareness? But yeah, I like it turned around the other way too, that it's a more rather than, you know, than a negative. But I guess, I don't know. There's all I'm saying that people in the workplace, hundreds of thousands, millions of people go from school into the workplace, never have any formal writing coaching or training or instruction, but they survive and, you know, they're there and they flourish. But I guess there's another kind of sort of on the ground kind of rhetorical message that comes back from the supervisor. You know, that this works or this doesn't work. And if the writer's lucky, that supervisor might be able to even articulate, look, you know, this is for the governor, and you know, you haven't pointed out the implications for monetary policy of your analysis. That's kind of about audience, and it's about purpose, and it's about the context as well. So it may be that it's kind of embedded within some, you know, formal mentoring or the kind of informal mentoring that happens, at least in organizations where there's a hierarchy and your work is going to be reviewed kind of all the way up the line.
Yeah, so the last comment
Yeah.
is that I'm thinking of the new Common Core state standards and the way, at least in the U.S., that this is trying to emphasize an alignment between workplace literacy and professional writing and what happens K through 16.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately think of the book Worlds Apart by Patrick Dias, Aviva Friedman, Peter Medway, and Anthony Paré. Basically, they spent 4 or 5 years looking at programs where college graduates would be going into a profession like social work, engineering, you know, that kind of professional program. And they said, well, let's look at the writing that the people do in the university, and let's look at the writing they have to do when they get out into the professional sphere of this discipline. And in the end, basically, they said, worlds apart. They said writing needs to accomplish certain things in school, and they're legitimate, and they have to happen. And those are different rhetorical goals and situations than people experience in the workplace. So, you know, if we're assuming that what happens to students in university should be very similar in terms of writing to the writing they do in the workplace, maybe that's a wrong assumption. You know, because in school, writing is supposed to help students learn individually. It's necessary it displays what they know so that they can be given A's and B's and C's and that kind of thing. So, and maybe it does that very well. And in the workplace, writing perhaps is used very effectively. But so perhaps that idea that writing instruction in college should somehow mirror what is going to happen when they get in the workplace just isn't feasible or doesn't make sense. I don't know. That was the argument anyway in that I think it was 90, well, no, not as long as that, but the book has been out for quite a while. But that was the argument in that book anyway. And I guess I kind of, with my own students, I sometimes kind of scare them a little bit. I teach undergrad and grad courses in research and theory and workplace writing. And sometimes in the undergrad courses we talk about, well, what about the writing they're going to have to do when they get out into the workplace? And I kind of scare them when I say what I just said. Well, maybe you shouldn't expect it to be kind of like just fit like a glove when you get out there, because writing is doing certain things for certain purposes in one site, and it's being used in another site for a whole other set of purposes. And then some kind of panic, but then I start talking about, okay, but there are certain things you take with you from the writing instruction and experience you've had in school. They're there, and we talk a lot about that. And we talk about strategies for newcomers and novices in a workplace for kind of becoming savvy about the writing that's going on and how they can learn. So it's kind of learning how to learn when you go into a new workplace, what roles and purposes writing is used for, and what the genres and conventions are. So, yeah.
I was just going to say kind of what you just said, but I've been that person in the workplace who hires people to come in and do writing.
Yeah.
And what they're looking for is, we used to say, can they hit the ground running? In other words, can they take a model of somebody else? It's almost more like high school. Can they take a model and recreate it in another context?
Right.
Like, can you write this press release as well as it was written here for this context? Which is the problem. There's not that, you can't transfer the same kinds of academic writing.
Right.
You have to understand the workplace situation, and that's where they stop.
Right. Maybe hitting the ground. Gee, when I hire these people, I want them to be writing when they hit the ground. Maybe that's just an unreasonable expectation, Unless, I guess, the sort of yes, but is always internships and that kind of thing where students do have a chance. They're enmeshed and they're doing writing that matters for particular purposes in an organization. Then I don't know if they can, hit the ground running, but but they're much more likely, I think, to be, the gap will have closed, I think.
Right, but even to your earlier point about the economist, the supervisor, everybody's different with all their different expectations, even within one organization.
It's true.
It's really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so coaching for workplace writers that promotes writing transfer includes asking workplace writers to explore a discourse community that's meaningful to them. Yeah, and I was saying when I worked with economists, I kind of do the research myself. I talk to the supervisor, and the supervisor, and the senior person who's going to be using this text. And I'd find out as much, I'd do kind of a contextual analysis, find out as much as I could, and then try and communicate that, get it down on paper, and something I could give, the people I was working with. So in a sense, those are aspects of a discourse community. What kinds of writing happen here and why, and how is writing used by different people, different areas of an organization. So I think you can. I wouldn't use the term discourse community. I just might say, well, the way it is around here, Coaching for workplace writers that promotes writing transfer includes recognizing the need to foster positive dispositions. I never had a lot of success, I don't think, in the bank sort of changing people's attitudes or outlooks. I could maybe, make life a little easier for a writer by helping them get better at the job they're doing, which perhaps would make them feel better about where they were and their capability to do the job they were there to do. I think, whoops, onto, what did I do? Did I jump one? I think I did. No, I didn't. Where am I? Okay, let's go on to this one. The design of physical and digital spaces. Well, when I would work with an economist, they obviously knew a whole lot more about the technologies and models and everything that they used than I did. I couldn't have told them anything about that. I had no control over the design of their workplaces. So maybe that's a case where It's simply what I experienced in the workplace simply isn't relevant. Not that that's wrong, it's simply not relevant. Writing transfer in the workplace requires explicit connections between self-sponsored and workplace writing. That happened a couple of times. I think it happened with Jennifer too, where we'd be working with people at the bank who did other kinds of writing, maybe a neighborhood newsletter or something like that. And yeah, we could make connections about similarities and differences, and perhaps help them think about strategies they used in that outside writing that they could bring to bear on their experience inside. So I say that's, yeah, I think that's very true. Thank you.